It's time for a special episode of Hot or Not with Jim. We're not going to run down all the comic books this week here, but we are going to wrap up Big Game, the event from Mark Millar, and it's this big crossover featuring all of his characters from the last 10, 15 years on the indie scene. And I would say this is the best comic event we've seen in years, probably the best since, I think, maybe House of X Powers of 10.
Yeah, definitely. And if you go before that, you have to go back a while again to get to the next deal. Yeah, probably Blackest Night. I mean, that's how bad these big events have been. They haven't felt big. They haven't felt like events. This feels like both. It's crazy.
The way I ended this thing, obviously we got the last issue this week. It was a double-sized issue. Lots of stuff going on here. This is almost like Infinity War and Endgame put into one event on the indie scene with Millarworld characters, but it was just so much darker and more devastating.
Oh, yeah. It felt at times, and he has done things in all of his comics, but especially in this, poking fun at some of the mainstream, some of the big two, and you could almost tell that he went into this saying, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it so much better, and I'm going to show them that you can get really dark, but if you make sense and have the whole idea in your head to get, you can do it and still end up at the end being satisfying and not feeling overly depressing and things like that. So it was good.
It felt like he had more fun taking all the stuff he created to their lowest point all at one time.
Oh, yeah. And that's the thing. When you read this, it is, and the whole event, you read, and things are happening. You're like, wait a second, like that book just started. Why are you destroying it? And he seemed like he was having so much fun doing it. And then, like I said, by the end, he twists and turns things to make it so that those books can continue, but in a better way, in a different way. And it just ended up at the end. At one point, I thought he was just burning it all down. Then at the end, you're like, oh, my God, he's a genius. This guy really knows what he's doing.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the 5 big takeaways why I think this is the best comic book event that we've actually read in years since House of X Powers of 10. Before that, you might have to go another 8 years to find something just as good as this that can even match the quality of Big Game. Number one, easily, no punches pulled in this one. He absolutely devastates all of his heroes. We see so many of his own creations just die in these absolutely sometimes heartbreaking, like great go out moments. Sometimes they get ambushed, but he was just finding so many inventive ways to kill off all the characters that he created. And I couldn't believe he was going so far with it.
Yeah. And the crazy play is when you go into this, you may not have read all of the books, but you're going to find it like an event always will have that idea like, oh, we'll put this in for Batman fans. We'll put this in for Spider-Man fans. Instead of that, Mark Millar's like, okay, I'll screw with the Kick-Ass fans. I'll screw it. And when these things are happening, the characters that you actually are like, okay, I'm here for that character. So many, if not all, just get devastated, just ripped apart. And you end up where you just can't believe it because it's so big and so crazy. And again, when we're talking about this, these are his creations, so he could do whatever he wants. But at a point, I thought, why is he doing this? Like, he's going to end up losing money in the long. It was so crazy that I did not see so many of it coming.
You know, he got Wesley from Wanted, and then he got Nemesis together to become like the big bad pairing. And with what they were doing, and they were able to easily roll through a few of these heroes. Obviously, a few of them got some good moments and were able to escape, and you wouldn't have had an ending without them. But I think he really built up the stakes and the threat that those two characters presented to all these heroes to where you could believe by the end that they were able to do that much devastation.
Yeah, and when you go through it and you think about it, like Wesley, he had the Wanted series. It was only one little deal, one trade of stuff. And you even go from, okay, what has he been doing since? You upgrade him, add Nemesis into it. And they do seem like an unstoppable force because they have the government, you know, under their toe. They have all these things going on. And it did feel at a point that the heroes would never be able to win. And that's what you need. You need that huge threat. And that really plays out in this.
Absolutely. So I think no punches pulled. He just dialed it up. Mark Millar to like 15, and I think it really worked out here. The second thing I think that is just really great in this comic book, the art is absolutely spectacular. This feels like an enormous big comic book event because of what Pepe Larraz is able to do with the art in here. There are so many just terrifying scenes, and he added so much depth to the story with just seeing what the characters were going through and the way that he was able to illustrate it. Like that one scene where you have the Chrononaut that's being used as a time traveling device as like the final page reveal. That was absolutely crazy. That's one of the best pages of art I've seen in a couple years.
It was so good. The art was great throughout, and we had consistent art because it's Pepe Larraz doing it. And the things, he wasn't pulling any punches either. I like that too, where Mark Millar's telling you this dark story, and it is just going with a punch in the gut from Pepe Larraz's art, again, because they're working together to tell the full deal. So good. And he was able to get a bunch of characters that were done in the past by a bunch of different artists with Mark Millar, and they were recognizable, all the people going. And even the idea, if you think like, oh, this is years from there, but it all makes sense, everything looked just spectacular. It really did.
You know, if Marvel does an event like this, there's going to be a big game Kick-Ass #1, a big game Hit Girl #1, big game Kingsman #1 with another artist that isn't nearly as good. It ends up detracting from everything. Keeping the one artist on everything that was told in here made it feel more important.
Yeah, and that's actually, if there were the whole deal of that would be like my number one or two thing about this, is that it was one book, one artist, one writer. You're going through everything consistent, everything leading up to that big play. You don't need to see Kick-Ass, what he's doing in between things. That lessens what he's doing in the main event book. And that's something that the big two just can't get. They're there for the money. Mark Millar is here to tell a really, really good story, and maybe even just prove that events can happen in this day and age when most people are event fatigued to the extreme.
And you mentioned Pepe the Raz, you know, with all the different characters that have been created by so many different artists, you know, so many amazing artists over the past decade or whatever. And it was really cool seeing characters from the Kingsman, you know, Eggsy with Hit Girl and stuff. Yeah. And the Chrononauts are sitting there, you know, with some other characters that you haven't really seen a whole lot. And the next thing you know, you got the Ambassadors, who are a newer team, and they're standing side by side, and they all felt like they belonged together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. And this is where I really think that this is so good, is the idea that there was a clever way for Mark Millar to tie everything in together to make an event. This isn't just, hey, everybody fell asleep and had nightmares. Hey, we get this. Hey, we get that. It actually made sense. And that elevated everything, because then you start thinking, okay, what would these characters do? And what would that happen? And how will this all be wrapped up? The whole thing makes complete sense. And by the end, even with crazy stuff happening, it all made sense by the end. It was really, really good.
The third thing I think that Mark Millar did absolutely phenomenally in Big Game is really every hero got a moment. We've talked about there are so many books that are leading into this, that there's so many characters that are part of the tapestry of this. But he really did give every team a moment to shine, or a moment where you felt like, oh, that felt like a really good Kingsman moment, or that's a good Ambassadors moment, or that's a good nightclub moment, or that's a really good Kick-Ass moment or Hit Girl moment. And even if maybe in the first 4 issues you didn't quite get that, maybe your favorite hero or your favorite character that was kind of obscure, maybe they kind of got taken out quick. By the end, they did get that moment.
Yeah. It actually, I mean, the idea where you're reading an event, and I'll tell everybody right now, if you aren't familiar with everything in the Millarverse deal, you can still read this. It's just going to get better and better, everything more you know. And I saw more people talking about this in a way that events should be there for. Oh my God, I never read Empress. I need to read that now. Oh my God, what's this Reborn? I didn't even know. I want to read that now. Most of the time with the big two, it's such a slug that people just want, it's like a marathon. They just want to end it. Oh man, it's over. Thank God. This actually is a springboard to what an event should do. It should end up making all the other books you haven't read, you want to go read them. And like you said, by the end, I have a couple favorite characters, and I was, we're not getting them. And one of the big things, I love Magic Order. So I was waiting, and they kind of, hey, we're not going to get involved. Then they do, and I'm like, that's awesome. That is so awesome, the way they do it. And Mark Millar also does a weird thing here where I don't think he sat there and said, okay, Kick-Ass is the most popular one, and we got this next. Everybody gets their moment. Some of the obscure characters get even more moments than some of the bigger ones, and I thought that was really, I didn't expect it.
I like what he did with Kick-Ass. You know, there was a moment in issue number 4 where everybody's meeting up like on the aircraft carrier, but he missed the bus. I was like, oh yeah, that's a kick-ass moment. He didn't get to make it, and that felt so in character. But in issue 5, he finally gets that elevated moment where everyone starts to recognize that this guy, his belief in superheroes and in what he believes in are the reason that maybe we'll be able to overcome this. And he gets elevated up, and I thought that was great. He's got like a little tear running down his eye.
Yeah,
and I was like, that was great. He deserved it.
He did, and Mark Millar gets what we know from the past about Kick-Ass, and even in the couple pages he's in there with his girlfriend, things like that, it's really going with that idea that he just wants to be a hero. And when he gets his, recognition at the end, and that's the crazy thing about this whole play of a world that used to have superheroes gets taken away, and this whole wanted stuff with Wesley, and then to show that legitimately the shining light was Kick-Ass, that he was the one, man, there's no heroes around, I want to be a hero. He was the one that really ends up bringing all of it down at the end just because he was that inspiration. It's such a cool little subtle deal that you really realize in the 5th issue. Oh my God, like this is it's a kick-ass story overall, but so many other crazy things happen. But yeah, I love Kick-Ass, but I love Magic Order. Everybody else is going to have their favorites, and they're all here, which is so cool.
Yeah, they're even hinted some things that are going to happen in the future. We had the nightclub guys still aren't getting along, so it felt like he got all the right beats. We got the great moments, but he was still pushing stuff forward, which I thought was pretty admirable of him because of so much of everything happening there at the end.
Yeah, and again, I'll repeat the idea. Usually you're sick and tired by the end of an event. You want to just get moving. This actually then not just makes you want to go read some of the things you may not have read, but it makes things like, say, The Ambassadors, all of a sudden that book becomes big. Like, oh my God, I can't wait to see that.
Where's volume 2?
And at one point, I was throwing my hands up like, why is he doing this? He only had one volume and he's just, he did something else. I'm like, oh my God, it makes it so much better.
Now, the 4th thing that I think that really made Big Game a huge success were all the twist and reveals. We got so many awesome final page reveals in this comic book. We got the twist right up front that heroes were basically exterminated in 1986 by Wesley's dad. Now he's gotten the fraternity of evil or whatever it is together. And now he's joined forces with Nemesis. Huge reveal. And then we kept getting these huge reveals. Like every single issue seemed to have 2 or 3 of these bad boys. When Hit Girl goes into the past and there's dinosaurs, that's a big reveal. But there was another bigger reveal waiting 3 pages down the line when the next comic book came out.
Yep. Yeah, it's so crazy. And each big reveal usually involved another book that you're like, oh my God. Like, and at one point I actually thought, and I think it was like the 3rd issue, like, how are they going to tie that book in? Is he going to do this? And he did. And it was crazy because it ends up being those shocking reveals. But then once you start going through it, I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. Okay, what they're doing here is cool. And everything just ties in like that in that whole play. And it really, like you said, starts with that idea of Wesley, his dad, Mr. Rictus, you see at the very beginning, taking out all the superheroes in a way that, it's now gritty, it's dark. And that's what I like about this by the end, that the big thing is like, okay, now we open up so much more that we can have, which, again, I didn't know. At one point, I thought he was burning it all down.
Well, he did burn a whole lot of it down.
He did. But the twists and turns make sense. And the big thing you have in this, almost like, an end game, you have time travel. You have a time travel element in this. But when things happen, they never felt like, oh, that's bull crap, or that doesn't make sense. Oh, it's actually very simple, the idea of the time travel, because it doesn't get too wonky. You don't get too many people involved, so you just go with it. And you don't sit there and try to explain it too much, so it all made sense to me by the end. I was like, that is really crazy.
And it gave you a big twist there, the final issue, when you see a character die.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa.
I was actually very upset. I'm like, oh, why would you yeah. And the funny thing is, Mark Millar and the characters in the comic actually like point at you and laugh that you're like, you didn't see that? Like, it was right there. And you're like, you're right. It was. So why did I not think of that? So it was really neat.
Yeah, I just really like the stuff with the Chrononauts. Obviously they get taken out pretty brutally there at the beginning. They go back in time and then she realizes he's dead and there's no way for Hit Girl to get back. when you get that final page reveal where they're using him to like power their time machine, his dead body.
Yeah.
I was like,
so
that
great.
is so good.
And it's so good, especially when he sees it and he's like, are you actually powering this? It's my body. And you're like, yep, thanks a lot. But yeah, they just go with it.
Well, a lot of people in comic books are really obsessed with that final page reveal or anything. And when you're trying to capture it and it doesn't work, it's just a huge letdown. But every single issue on this one, like the final page had you wanting more. There was an amazing death or a big revelation of what was going to happen next and what was going to be pushing the story forward. And there were just huge twists and turns. And I think, with the three big villains, at the end we get the, what is this? It's King Maddox?
Yeah. And that's,
Nemesis.
again, a character that I'm not really familiar with. So that was one of the things that I was a little, but it still works out, right?
Yeah, we got King Maddox, we got Wesley, and then we've got Nemesis as like the three big bads. And there is ultimately, one of them is not coming back, but the other two are certainly left on the table in two very different spots to where they're going to be big threats in the future. So, it just all played out so well.
And the one is he's already got a list. Like they're saying, like he's going to be back. It might take a while, but he's got a list going. And one of the things that is cool, if you've read Wanted and you kind of get that concept of the deal, even during Wanted, as you have to keep reminding yourself that the characters that you're rooting for, they're bad. They're real bad. And that's what I liked about this too, using Wesley and the Fox and them in that. They are awful, awful people. They are true villains. I mean, just even if they didn't have powers or whatnot, they are still awful people. So it actually, by the end of this, you ended up having, with the timey-wimey twist deal, you ended up having really satisfying things going on. Like, thank God, like I really wanted you. I'd never thought that I'd enjoy watching these people in a plane who are going to drop a nuke just die because of what they had done an issue before. Like, there's so many things like that like, oh my God, this is so good.
Yeah, so it's been hard. It's hard to talk about it without getting into a lot of details. We might have spoiled a couple things here or there, or maybe hinted at a few things, but not gave it all the way. But there's so much to enjoy in this. I definitely recommend everyone go out and read this. And this is my final takeaway from Big Game that made it amazing. And you've kind of hinted at this multiple times here. It makes you want to go back and read everything. There are plenty of things in Millarworld that I haven't read. I haven't read Empress. You mentioned that one earlier.
Yep.
There's a couple other stories out there I haven't really read. I haven't read Huck. Yep. And there's a few other books out there, and I'm very tempted to go out there and find somebody and just start from the beginning and review every single issue and throw it on the Patreon just as a little bonus, so I can get through the whole thing and really enjoy it and share it with anybody. Because I want to finally get back to Big Game, in another year and a half or whatever, and truly enjoy every moment and actually get to enjoy every single Easter egg now that I know just how much effort was put into it by Mark Millar and just how much more there is to enjoy in this book that I didn't even get.
Yeah. And maybe we'll have to talk, Wes, because I actually have already started that. I'm not that far in either. I was so into the first couple issues that I have started a deal podcast going through all of them. I'm only up to the third, Kick Ass. So maybe we'll talk a little afterwards about what we could do or whatnot, because that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, I never read Reborn. I never read Empress. There's a couple of those that I hadn't. And every time somebody came up, you just want to go and read it. And I'm sure that when you do go back and read them, you end up seeing how cooler it was to then go back to Big Game as an event. It's really, really good.
Yeah, and I think that's a mark of a great event. When you're done with it, you're like, I need to read more. I want the stuff that's in the future, because all the stuff that's been hinted at is great, but I need to go in the past and find all the stuff that I've missed. That is a mark of an event that really is executed at the highest level, because you can't get enough. You have to have more right now.
And what else would a company have an event for? They want to get eyes on books, and of course they want people to become fans of characters that they may not know of. And that's the other thing about it. And I said earlier, the focus on everybody is such a simple sounding thing, but yet when we get events, Batman. So you never really get that much of a focus on the other things in a way that you want to go back and read some past stuff because they're so worried about, oh, we have to do this generic because people won't know this. And we have to have Batman because it won't sell. We have to have that. And you end up really, it just feels like what it is, an advertisement, but nothing more. You get this idea. It's a cash grab. It's summer. Here you go. This felt different. This felt, and it shows because these are his creations. He has passion for them. He wants people to read the things that they have and look forward to things in the future. So it was done, like I said, with a lot of care and love and passion. And that's something you don't see much anymore in the big two.
And I think it is a great example that maybe Marvel and DC have gotten so big. You know, and the characters have been around for so long. There's so many issues, especially with your Batman, your Superman, your Spider-Man, your X-Men or whatever, that you might not be able to pull off a really great tie together event because you would be contradicting stuff in the past or stuff that's already been covered, or there are things going simultaneously in continuity that don't make sense with what you're doing there. You have this nice, controlled, smaller universe that Mark Millar has been working on for years and years. I don't know that he ever planned to make big game. I don't know that when he created, the Chrononauts, he thought, I can't wait for them to cross over with Kick-Ass. I don't even know if he thought they were in the same universe.
That was the case, but you can never doubt him. But I think that what he did was he knows the characters and the situation, was able to come up with that clever way to get everything in. And I'll even go further with what you're saying. You also get the idea, just say, because this could have been a DC event where it starts off where all of our big heroes get decimated and people would have went nuts. Oh my God. But even to get...
Well, that's what Dark Crisis was supposed to be.
Yeah,
with Justice League 50.
Again, and that's
not what it was.
A great example. It was supposed to be that, but again, you probably have to take that through a ton of channels. Well, we want to do this. Well, you can't really do that because that's our cash cow. Oh, we want to do that. Oh, we have a movie coming out. You can't. And then you end up with your hands tied and you get generic stuff, and that's a shame. But you can see where Mark Millar, he's like, I'm going to do this. It's not like we're going to get Wanted 2, the movie, but even so, he takes care of all these things going on. And by the end, you said it, you're so inspired to go back and read the other things while also you can't wait till what would come next. And it's just done so well. And maybe the big two should look at this and realize, maybe we have to take chances because this was taking chances, even of its own thing. And it paid off big time.
Yeah, I think they need to start realizing it's time to invest in the creators. Stop getting so many voices in there. Stop stuffing so many characters that don't need to be in there. Get one artist and tell them and let them execute and tell the most kick-ass story that they can possible. And you can get stuff like Big Game. And, I feel, there's been some decent events. I like King in Black. I thought Devil's Reign was pretty decent. There's a couple things in here there over the last few years, but nothing has ever felt quite like this.
No, and again, you say stuff like if you like King in Black, which I liked some of it, but it got too overwhelming.
Enormous.
It got bloated. All of them get bloated. You have these other things, and that it lessens it. I mean, we just had Dark Crisis, which I didn't think was great, right? But then we also had that Teen Titans Young Justice book that just brought it all down. You ended up having the worlds. Everything added on just seems like after the fact. It doesn't seem like that's part of the big plan that's thought out, and that's what they need. And you have problems when you add too many cooks to the kitchen, and that's what they always do to try to maximize the amount of money that they'll make from a thing, when really if they just take care, give the passion and the deal, the money will probably come from that, not just overdone books.
And it doesn't surprise me that the last time I can think of an event of this quality was House of X Powers of 10 that had no tie-ins. That had one writer, had two artists, Pepe the Raz on one book, R.B. Silva on another book, where they're pretty similar artists with the same colors, so they look pretty similar. And it had a feel of continuity to it. It felt like one cohesive story, and it built it up and it made it feel more important.
Yeah, and it did build it up in a way of like, hey, we're going to focus this book on this, then this one will be the other thing that we'll deal with. And the art was a slight difference so that you could tell the difference between the books, but actually pretty congruent with the deal. So it did feel big, and people were fired up. I mean, if people remember, it's not that long ago, people were really, really excited about it because of how well it was done. That's really the be all end all. It's just write a good story, make it make sense, not just, hey, we need another event. It's the idea of, a band having a greatest hits deal where, oh, we got to fulfill this contract. Let's throw a greatest hits out there. We don't need to read comic events like that, but that's how they become. We need to do it. Oh, it's on the schedule, summer event, boom. And they've been bad.
All right, Jim. So we've wrapped up Big Game. We got issue number 5 this week, but I definitely very enthusiastically recommend this to everyone. Absolutely spectacular stuff.
I do too. Yep, everybody should read it.
But you and I are not done today. We are actually going to go and record another 2-hour podcast talking about all the new releases from Marvel, DC, indie scene. We're also going to do the Dad Corner. We're going to tell you what you should read, what you should avoid. It'll be up live on the Patreon on Thursday, so before this even goes up on YouTube. And we're going to have a lot of fun with that. And we do that every single week, Jim.
Yep, every single week is what you tell me. Yes, we do. It's fun. And yeah, we actually get to, if people are there, maybe surprised because we actually like something in this big game. We actually do like comics each week, and we talk about them on the show.
And you also have a Patreon, so definitely look for Weird Science Comics Patreon as well, where he's got lots of reviews and tons of podcasts as well.